Just because I'm not mean doesn't mean I'm a good man. And just because I'm a nice guy, whatever the fuck that means, doesn't mean I'm a great man. And in fact, it's covert manipulation. It's all these kinds of things that are just not cool, not good. And I think any relatively grounded person, man or woman, can recognize the difference between a great man and a nice guy.
Welcome back to the Sacred Soul podcast. I'm super excited for today's episode. Jordan, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I like to start off all my episodes by asking my favorite question. Who are you and who are you not? Even if this might change from day to day, year to year.
That's a fun question. Let's see. Who am I? The first thing that wants to come to mind, uh, I'm a conscious bro. That used to be like my brand and persona for several years. But funny enough, I retired that jersey, so to speak, last year. It just felt like I'd kind of graduated from putting myself into that box. And yet, that does still very much feel like a part of me. At my heart, I'm a bro. I love to kick it with the bros. I love brotherhood. I mean, that's my life's work. I'm going to my college fraternity's alumni reunion this weekend. So like that's just a big part of me. And there's this conscious component where I always want to be conscious of who I am, how I'm showing up in the world, how I'm honoring my creator, my purpose, my woman, my family, my community. And so there's that level of mindfulness and yeah, just care for all those kinds of things. So I guess that's a snippet of who I am. I love to play basketball, like basketball and dogs are a big part of my life. I love both of those. Who am I not? I am not politically correct. I am not a guru, although I will say I am a guru of fun. Some people have told me that before. A friend
I
told me.
love that. That's brilliant.
um, yeah, I wouldn't even say that I'm a spiritual teacher, even though I lead men and host retreats and all those kinds of things. There's something about that that feels a little presumptuous and doesn't resonate with me personally. Um, who am I not? I'm not a man who has it all figured out and has my shit together. There's a part of me that still feels like a fucking teenager. It still feels very naive, immature, unprepared. So there's a few things off the top of my head.
I love it. I love it. And I enjoy this question. It never gets old. I asked all of the guests this, I think, just about. And I enjoy the who am I not part the most. One, it always changes, right? And it's kind of just fun. Like we could literally have fun with these different costumes or seasons of life that we find ourselves in, or different characteristics that we resonate with at different times of our lives. So love it. Love it. So how did you start before the Jordan 3.0, 2.0, whatever you think you might be right now? Like, who were you before some of your conscious progression and personal development transformations?
Let's see. There's a few key inflection points in my journey. One of them is I was born in Southern California into an evangelical, charismatic church kind of setting. My grandparents were pastors of a church for 30 plus years called Powerhouse Christian Fellowship. And like, I mean, that church was out of a movie, like holy laughter, speaking in tongues, slain in the spirit. My aunt did interpretive dance during worship before the sermon started. My grandpa led all the sermons. And so I was born into that. And then my parents got divorced when I was like 2.5. And so that was a big deal. Like divorce in the Christian church is a big deal. And then I moved to Ohio with my mom. And I had two very different worlds. So I spent summers with my dad in California, was forced to read the Bible, go to church, very much like solid middle class Southern California. And then in Ohio, Midwest, small town, by most people's standards in America, I was relatively poor, somewhere between like lower middle class and poor, somewhere in that range. Mom was a partier, alcoholic. My house was the house where all the firsts happened. So the first time you drank booze, first time you smoked weed, first time you got a hand job, first time you huffed gas, like that's something that happened at my house. And so just two very different worlds once again. And then I guess I'll make a long story somewhat short here. Then I moved back to California in high school, lived with my grandparents who were the pastors. And I think that's a big part of my journey is I was for my circumstances with aunts and uncles, grandparents, even friends' parents. And there was a part of me that hated it because it was very unstable. But there's also part of me that really appreciated it. And especially now, I see how it molded me into being somebody who's very adaptable. And then from there, the next two big inflection points going to San Diego State for college and specifically being in a fraternity, as I referenced at the beginning of this podcast, that many stereotypes in that setting for a reason. There's a lot of truth to them. And yet the positive parts of it had a huge impact on my life. Brotherhood, rites of passage, leadership, all those kinds of things from an 18 to 22-year-old basically. That was a lot to manage at that age. And yeah, just very grateful for that. And that really introduced me to men's work. I wouldn't have called it men's work back then, but in hindsight, it definitely was. And then shortly after that, maybe a few years or so out of college, did the corporate marketing thing, using my degree, doing what I thought I should do. But ultimately, I knew that that was not what was meant for me. So I sold everything I owned and started living out of my car with my pit bull, who I had gotten just out of college. And I did that for about a year. And during that process, I discovered Bulletproof. So people are probably familiar with Bulletproof Coffee, but it's lifestyle brand nutrition company, and was following the podcast and just became a diehard Bulletproof bro. And that was where my intro to personal development, at least intentionally speaking, really came online. And I started working for them. I got my dream job there, which that was really important. That was the first time I addressed limiting beliefs around what I could accomplish.
Mm.
I was like, wow, no, I can get a very sought after job if I just put my unique talents to the test. And I made a really funny video of why they should hire me and spliced it all up. I actually revisited it the other day. I mean, this is, we're talking 10 plus years ago, probably closer to 15. And a part of me cringes, like watching, like, oh, you dork. But a greater part of me is like, fuck yeah, bro. Like, good on you. That was very courageous and very just cool. So I'll wrap it up here. Being in that container for, I think, like 6, 7 years as the national educator, I bounced around the country, went to a bunch of different personal development retreats, health conferences, masterminds, festivals, things like that, and was just exposed to a lot of the heavy hitters and brands in the space. And from there, it was like, I love this shit. I want to do this in all areas of my life. And very organically, I was very public with my life, doing Facebook Lives and the like. And a lot of my friends from high school and college, and just other people who discovered me, started resonating with what I had to say and were kind of seeking some of my counsel and support. And fast forward many years later, I'm now in the latest iteration of all that, which is hosting men's experiences.
It's a lot in there.
I feel like I had a million more things to say, but I was a little long-winded with it.
No, your elevator, I think part of podcasting is just mastering that elevator of like where were we before where we are now. One clarification though, was living in your car, was that like a rock bottom experience? Was it really quick, or how long did that last?
Yeah, I wouldn't. It's funny. I've never been asked, was that a rock bottom experience? And I could totally understand why that might be interpreted, because you hear that and it's kind of like, huh, that's kind of intense. It was very much by choice. So
Okay.
it wasn't a forced thing. However, there was a part of it that felt rock bottom. I had broken up with my college sweetheart, or said more accurately, she broke up with me because I was too much of a coward to break up with her.
Yeah.
And that was really, really challenging. I mean, this was the woman who I thought I was going to get married to. And we had all those kinds of conversations, and that was the path. And so breaking up was just shook up my world a lot. Um, so yeah, not rock bottom per se, but there were components of rock bottom.
Yeah, yeah.
Year, just shy of a year.
Okay. Oh, that was a year. Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. Yeah, and maybe I assumed it was a rock bottom because I'm like, oh wow, that'd be so destabilizing.
Yeah. And it was. I mean, at first it was awesome. I was just very flexible. I was staying with a lot of friends and family, bouncing around the country, and I had my crate full of bulletproof products, and that was a bit of my calling card. I had my Biggie James Smalls, my pit bull, and my bulletproof coffee products. And that was what I bring to whatever space I was in. And again, the first like 3 to 6 months, it was so fun. It was exciting. I was, my mid 20s, didn't really have a whole lot of responsibilities and cares, so to speak. But then, when it got like 6+ months, I was like, okay, I'm ready to not do this anymore. But then fear of commitment, where do I want to lock into? And eventually Santa Cruz is where I found myself for about a year.
Yeah. Wow, what a powerful story. And I, whether it's considered rock bottom or not, I find that the common thread that most of us have is some type of wake up call or extra push or I mean there's so many things we could label. It doesn't have to be a rock bottom, but I love mentioning that because as people are listening, we know what our rock bottoms have been, or some of us can kind of sense like when we're coming out of one or when we were in one, and it just really helps us like kind of take the judgment and the shame out of it and just be like, this is a part of growth, this is a part of expansion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just quickly speak to rock bottom because this feels it's pretty recent for me. My rock bottom was this time last summer. Uh,
Mm.
I think that you maybe saw some of my journey over the past year. My wife and I were new parents, and we had an early miscarriage. And then last summer, we were in the second pregnancy. And there was a few week period where I just got hit with everything. First, my pit bull that I mentioned passed
Mm.
fairly unexpectedly. I mean, he was 12 and a half, so he was a little bit older, but that was my dog son. Like that was my ride or die homie. I had loved him dearly. I have him tattooed on my leg. That's how serious I was and am about him. And about a week later, we were, I think, 6 months pregnant at that point. We found out that our son had Down syndrome, which was like, holy shit, not expecting that. That's just not what we thought life had in store for us. And no sooner had we come to some level of acceptance, embracing, and even getting a little bit excited. I was calling him my Downy dude. Uh, and just, I was like having fun with, man, I'm going to join this community.
Embracing it.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
be a proponent for it. And we were just starting to research it. And then about a week or two later, my wife went into pregnancy, or went into labor rather, and we lost him at about 22 and a half weeks. And I mean, she delivered him alive, and we actually got to spend about an hour and a half with him while he was still living. And I mean, just even, it's such a surreal thing to talk about. It feels like it didn't actually happen, but it happened. And so, yeah, that anything else I would have classified as rock bottom in my life pales in comparison to all that unfolding last summer. And certainly on the other side of it, I see what it did for me, like that mindset. Fuck, if I don't have that mindset, life can be really tough to contend with. But really, I do see the gifts that it afforded me and how it brought my wife and I together and prepared us to be parents that we now are with an 8 week old.
Yeah. Wow. And how did you guys really navigate that?
I'd say we still are. Um,
Mhm.
the last 1 to 2 years of our relationship has been really challenging. Um, we have worked together. So a part of my story that I didn't necessarily get into is I met my wife about, I guess, 7 years ago now. And I was living in San Diego. She was living in New Orleans. And I came across her on Facebook, many mutual friends kind of a thing. And I swear I had never done this before, but I slid into her DMs with a freestyle rap. I took my shot, and
Creative.
Uh, had a face, exchanging some messages from there, had a couple FaceTime dates. And then a few weeks after that, I flew out to New Orleans to meet her to one of my bulletproof territories, which was just my excuse to get a free flight out there to meet her. And yeah, then from there, we just went all in very quickly in our relationship. We just knew we were both right around 30, which I think is just a solid age to consciously go into an all in relationship. And she was a sex educator, still is, although she's full-time mama now and is, indefinitely on maternity leave, which was equal parts intriguing and terrifying for me. And eventually, I guess about 3 to 4 years ago, we went all in business together. And anybody who has worked with their significant other can attest to the challenge that comes with that. I think it's very glamorized. Like, oh man, power couple, like, yeah. And I very much had that feeling and approach to it. And it is not for the faint of heart. Uh, a comparison I would make is not a perfect comparison, but I think there's one to be made. It's like kind of polyamory. I think there's this idea that, oh, many loves and open relating is really beautiful, and there's a lot of growth associated with it. I think all that's true, and yet, my experience is it's well, not my personal experience with that because I've never done that kind of relationship, but my judgment, what I've seen is very few people can do that successfully and sustainably. And I think that that's the case with working with your spouse at a really high level.
Got it.
And so the first year was just pretty bad. I mean, it certainly had its ups, but a lot of downs. And then eventually we found a nice flow. But then when pregnancy came into the mix and that journey, it just made it all the harder. And as it goes, your partner being your everything, roommate, lover, business partner, all those kinds of things, it can just get so entangled and so hard to appropriately compartmentalize it all. And then just accelerating and exponentiating all of that with the challenges of last summer, our relationship took a big hit. And I would even say it came to ahead. Not that there's ever been any true concern that we wouldn't make it, but a couple months ago, it was like it felt like we could not have a day without some sort of somewhat significant conflict. And it was just so much nitpicking. And, we've had the least amount of sex ever in our relationship the past couple of years, both because of a very like logistical, physical limitation with pregnancy, with postpartum, and some of that stuff. And then just energetically, not something that's been super appealing and accessible in that regard. Um, so yeah, it's there's a lot to unpack there potentially, but that's a bit of our journey the past couple years in particular.
Yeah, thanks for opening up and just being so honest. And I think I get a sense. My question was, and you might have answered it somewhere in there, but I was just asking how you guys navigated that particular time. Losing your
Yeah.
son.
Yeah. So the short answer is community.
Okay.
Um, Something that I never quite realized how important and powerful it is my wife having her own girlfriends, like all in chosen family girlfriends, me having my counterpart of that with men, and then the next level that again I never even considered, never even crossed my mind as being as important and valuable as it is couples, all in couples. And so we have a group of friends that are all in couples together. It's 5 couples. The men are best friends, the ladies are best friends, and there's just this interweaving of friendships, co-ed, there's such comfortability, there's such radical reflections and relating, and a true all-inness and champion for each other's relationships and the entity that transcends just me or just my wife, but like us together. And so the past year in particular, but really a few years now, that has been, I would say, the most supportive and important thing that we've cultivated. I mean, just, I was referencing a couple of months ago where it came to a head. I actually, in somewhat of a place of desperation, reached out to one of those couples, and they did a mediation with us. It was just so powerful because they both love us and know us super intimately, and they could hold that space, hold us just energetically accountable to not getting lost in our shit, and could reflect things back, ask good questions, and that like fundamentally shifted everything for us.
Wow, so powerful, so powerful. And then just to circle back on one thing, that power couple, persona can be so, I mean, it's like, yes, if you desire it, go for it, right? I'm not discouraging anyone. I know you probably are not discouraging anyone, but it's like when it's time to have the real talk, it's like, um, like there's so much that goes into it. But some of us, myself included, I just see Grant Cardone and Elena Cardone, and I'm like, yeah, must be so easy.
Yeah, don't get it twisted. It's like it's seductive. It seems like it's all rainbow and butterflies, type
Right.
of thing, but it is challenging, and I don't think it's for everyone.
Right, right, right. Yeah, beautiful. And I think if anything, if anyone's taking anything away from from Jordan's, shares about his relationship and just the power couple dynamic and all of that, it's just be prepared to meet yourself with all of your challenges, all of your blocks, all of your either lack of boundaries, or some of us could have be too guarded with our boundaries, in these types of relationships. So yeah, really important stuff.
Mm.
Yeah. And community.
Yes, amen.
And community. Yeah. So back to community as far as in the work that you're doing with brotherhood and men's work, fraternity, the fraternity dynamic kind of planted the seed for you, and then you just kept going on your journey, and then it all connected. Um, what are some of the challenges that really keep you so dedicated to your work?
I love that question. You are asking very good questions that are genuinely unique.
Thank you.
So, I mean, we just were talking about it, right? It's masculine, feminine dynamics. And I get that there's plenty of incredible practitioners out there, retreats, books, Way of the Superior Man, David Data, John Wineland, all the people. And I love that stuff. It's had a huge impact on my life. And I think that, let's put it this way, I'm very mindful when I recommend the book Way of the Superior Man. It's like, is this guy ready for this? Because otherwise, it can be so woo-woo and so kind of hard to relate to, that I've prematurely recommended that to some people, and it's a turnoff. Uh,
Mm,
and so in my work, I fancy myself the bridge for an average dude who just wants to be a better guy. He's a good guy and wants to be a great man. He might not word it like that, but he works hard. He's typically a dad or and is in an all-in relationship, but there's a complacency there. Oftentimes, a very common route to finding me is the lady follows my wife. My wife is that sex chick on Instagram and follows her podcast and exposes her man to her, but like more so to me. And I think that it helps bridge that gap. It's like, oh, this guy, he's normal. I feel like I could just kick it with him and it would be easy. And so we can have those, what I call FUNcomfortable conversations, get into like the really tender, vulnerable stuff around romance. And especially for a man, that there's just such a, yeah, again, a tenderness there that it can be really tough to talk about. Yeah, our sex life is subpar. We maybe even have a sexless relationship where we're having sex less than once a month on average. And maybe the rest of the relationship is generally good. Like we don't fight, we take care of the kids well together, we have harmony in our home, but there's not passion. There's not like a palpable perpetual up leveling that's happening. There's not like an iron sharpens iron kind of dynamic. And so a lot of men will come to me with that.
mm,
Sometimes there's a little bit of that again, and I more or less implied this, but there's some pushing from the female partner. But I think that I have a unique way of being a good entry point for those kinds of guys. And like, I mean, one kind of random example, but I think it illuminates what I'm speaking to here. an entire afternoon at my quarterly, I do like quarterly biannual retreats. My next one here is in about a month and a half. It's called the Man Meat Retreat. I mean, you can just like feel the playfulness in the names and all of the
Yeah.
words, verbiage I use. So an entire afternoon is dedicated to what I call the Bro Olympics.
Love that.
Like 3 to 4 hours, we just compete. We play games, volleyball, cornhole, all like the yard games and stuff like that. And there's a winner. We do a point system, somebody wins, and then like the first place loser gets paddled by the winner, which is some of my fraternity shit that comes into play, right? Which is like, you might call that toxic masculinity. You might think, I don't know, that's kind of weird, but it's when boys will be boys. And when you allow that tastefully, I think it just only enhances the experience. And that's interspliced with like heavy hitter, big name, sincere facilitators coming and doing workshops. Yeah, I could say more, but I think that's a big part. Is relationship dynamics is one of the cores of what I work with men.
Amazing, amazing. And what about emotional support or emotional intelligence or emotional awareness?
Mm-hmm. That's a huge one. I like to use the word or like the phrase emotional alchemy or emotional fitness.
Hmm.
I love that you brought that up because probably even more so recently, yeah, the romance relationship stuff is huge, but I think the precursor to that is what you're asking about, is being in touch with my emotions. Man, I think about my, I said, man, woman, I think about my high school and college relationships, in particular my college relationship, the one I referenced a little earlier. And I was just so shut off from my emotions. I was so repressed them, avoided them, just didn't have the intelligence, didn't have the language to speak about them. And I really pride myself in creating a safe space to not play it safe, in particular with emotions. And so we do pretty gnarly workshops where we'll do like breath work, which I think is predictably a great, like a solid breath work journey can bring up some serious issues that are alive in the tissues.
Hmm.
And I think for men in particular, there's such a need for getting into our bodies and finding like where are the emotions kind of hiding in all the crevices because the body
Hmm.
keeps score, as maybe some of your listeners are familiar with. The issues are in the tissues, like I said earlier. And so we'll do a lot of like active meditations, deep breath work journey experiences, and inevitably dudes are popping off. They're crying, they're screaming, and I'm very much encouraging that, holding that space. And then on the other side of that kind of a ritual, there's just this opening, there's this rawness, this raw authenticity, and then asking the right questions and getting clarity. Suddenly, men are cultivating that emotional intelligence, and they've alchemized some of the anger. Anger is a huge one for men, especially in modern society. It's not safe to be angry. I've been told this story that my anger is dangerous,
Hmm.
especially religious influences. It's like, oh, that is not of God. That's the devil. And emotions are just energy in motion. Now, I get to wield that power in a safe, appropriate way. So I think that's where some men get it wrong. Is the opposite side is fucking unleashing my anger on people and on in ways that are just not healthy and appropriate. And so we get to play with a lot of that stuff in like especially in an in-person retreat setting. I have plenty of my virtual stuff. I have a men's group where we meet weekly, and those are great and important, but nothing is a substitute for the in-person experiences where you can really dig into that, feel each other, feel your body, be led through those things that again help cultivate that emotional intelligence.
Amazing. I love it. And I admire it so much because it's we're just in this this is such a tricky thing to say because everyone has their own perception of where we are in our culture right now. We're all experiencing it differently. But I think that somewhere, um, yeah, somewhere just masculinity started to like catch a lot of shame or a lot of blame for things, right? And yes, there is toxic masculinity that does exist, right? But I kind of feel like it was a little I don't know, it kind of got misdirected in some instances, maybe not all. So, and I feel like as a past energy healer, now I'm doing more purpose coaching for anyone who's been following me and you're still like, wait, what? Past energy healer. But coming out of the energy healer space, it's like shame is such a contracting energy and we all deal with it. But it's the energy that's such a low vibration, whether we're feeling shameful because of our feminine qualities or our masculine qualities or anything else. It can really just keep us in this low state to where we feel like we can't expand and grow. And so that's why I admire the work, is because whatever has started to happen in culture in the last 10 years, or I don't know, 5 years, with that shame and blame on the masculine energy, where in places where it may not have been applicable or kind of overboard, it's just like, okay, integrating it, healing it, and moving on. So that way we don't pass down those wounds. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things come to mind. One, I'm just gonna come out hot with this one. Most men in America, around my age, I'm 36, were generally genitally mutilated upon birth, i.e.,
Right. There's that I forget about. Yeah.
oh, and I remember the first time I was exposed to the idea I'm circumcised, right? Uncircumcised, I like to use the word intact. I got exposed to this community and just all the controversy around this and started to feel into the implications of most men in America, again, like our generation and like for many generations, uh, that kind of trauma and just like what that instills around sex and shame and some of the things you're speaking to, and then the shadowy shit around that then comes out in whatever ways. Not that I want to trace it all back to that, but there's absolutely something there that I think deserves to be explored. Um, and then just not really necessarily directly related to that, um, this idea of nice guy syndrome. The book by Robert Glover is so good. No More Mr. Nice Guy. It's one of my core foundational reads that I recommend to men. And that's actually typically the first one because I think that one is very accessible. It speaks in a language that essentially any man can relate to and vibe with. So I think that being introduced to that, the confronting nature of being called a nice guy and having nice guy syndrome and having thought, I mean, I'm a perpetually, um, I'm a nice guy, in rehab, rehabilitation. That relates to me very personally. But this idea that just because I'm not mean doesn't mean I'm a good man. And just because I'm a nice guy, whatever the fuck that means, doesn't mean I'm a great man. And in fact, it's covert manipulation. It's all these kinds of things that are just not cool, not good. And I think any relatively grounded person, man or woman, can recognize the difference between a great man and a nice guy. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
great man doesn't always do the popular thing. In fact, oftentimes they say the unpopular thing or do the unpopular thing that everybody is thinking or feeling, but wouldn't dare go there. Whereas a nice guy, status quo, he avoids, he doesn't speak up, doesn't speak truth, isn't courageous, kind of cowers, is allows himself to be controlled by women, all that kind
People
of stuff.
pleasing
Oh yeah, please.
or narcissistic
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and charming.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to pop this in there for any women who are listening too. It's what he's talking about is also similar to the good girl complex. Be
Mhm.
a good girl. Don't speak up. If you don't like it, don't say anything. It's kind of just like that suppression of our authentic self and our development too. So
Uh,
yeah. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. And so again, just to kind of wrap up this segment is this is why men's work is so needed and healing and integrative uh, and expansive because of some of the cultural things that are just normal to everyone else, like you mentioned, like babies getting circumcised, like those types of things. And it doesn't stop there. There's so many things that energetically, mentally, and emotionally impact our men in our world. And so, yeah, just moving beyond it, moving through it, integrating, expanding. It's also important. Is there anything else that's really powerful that's happening in your communities that you want to share?
hmm. this is something that I haven't directly said yet. I've kind of danced around it a little bit. Um, it's not as super present for me personally in my work right now. It's definitely still has a place, but much more when my wife and I were working together, and it's her brand is That Sex Chick, and Sex and Love Co is our brand that we have run together. Conscious kink and BDSM, which hearing those, if you have no idea what that means, or just hearing BDSM without any context, I know I was very averse to it. I was like, that's people have like mental disorders, they're playing out trauma, it's so many judgments.
Mm,
And as I was exposed to that world in a way that was, I think, very light filled and positive, and with really high integrity practitioners, uh, I started to just be like, oh shit, this is, I mean, the energy of sex and that kind of relating and experiencing is it's powerful. And I can either do it sort of passively and just, okay, cool, P in the V with my wife, or just with randoms, and cool. It's like there's novelty and it feels fun. But there's a whole nother level of awakening and opening that can happen. And so I typically have at least one practitioner, like a good friend who works in that space, that will come to my retreats or be guest facilitator in my virtual men's group. I'll just drop a couple names for people that they can look up. Kimmy Inch. She's a very close friend here in Austin. She's a professional dominatrix, has been so for like 20 years. She's the only woman that comes to my men's retreats, and she's just world class. This guy, Omrapani, who's Tantra and BDSM, Lori Handlers. There's some people who have really pioneered that space and brought a lot of these modalities together
mhm,
in a very courageous and unique way that I think women are more tuned in and tapped, like they recognize that. Men, I think, I mean, back to what we were talking about before, BDSM, dominance and submission. As a man,
mhm,
there's a fear of like, wait, I can't be dominant. Like that's wrong. That's toxic masculinity. That's unsafe. I can't trust myself to wield that kind of energy, because like what could happen? And that when that can be embraced and wielded with maturity, with experience, with just knowledge and embodied wisdom, it is, I mean, the sky's the limit with that. As my wife and I, it hasn't been as accessible and present in more recent months, but it's just a core to our relationship is that kind of dynamic of dominance and submission. And we could unpack that for days, but just one last little thing I'll say is dominance and aggression are not the same thing. And
right.
for me as a man, when I was first exposed to this world, I didn't realize that. I thought dominance,
Hmm.
choking, it's like slapping, it's kink, like all that stuff. Those were the images I had in my mind. And
Hmm.
that's totally not what it is. It's an energetic thing, it's leadership. And I think the best way to look at it is dominance and submission is leader follower. The more
Yes.
strong of a leader I can be, and the better of a follower my wife can be. And that's not obviously, I'm doing some kind of gender norm type of stuff, and position yourself however you'd like in that. But that's the most common dynamics I see. That space navigated it just opens up so much.
Yeah. And my theory is it allows us to we won't go too deep because this will be another hour conversation, but my theory is it allows us to access some deep desires that most of us have been suppressing, right? And then also a little bit of like shadow work is sprinkled in there. And I think you were alluding to that. I probably just placed a label on top of it so we could all kind of recognize it for what it is.
Yep, totally agree. That's definitely been my experience, and I've seen people have, not to compare breakthroughs, but in that, again, tender space of sexual expression and experiencing and exchange, the biggest, most profound breakthroughs I've seen people have been in those settings, myself included.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, so powerful. I just love all the work that you're doing. It's just amazing. I mean, that's like the extra layer. And in my own life, I definitely understand all of that. I have a long history with all of it. And I've had to like leave it and then come back, and there was some confusion and like shame and like all kinds of stuff. But no, now I'm at a more peaceful place with it, and it's just it's so powerful, and the proof is in the pudding, really. So for someone who hears about this stuff again, they can have so much resistance, judgments, and like all this other stuff. But when we can receive the information from professionals like the high quality people that you listed that come to your spaces, it's like that's quality information where it's like a set container. You can kind of put your guard down and just see what resonates with you. So yeah, thanks for mentioning all that good stuff.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. And then you listed some great books already. Do you have one more that you could recommend?
Oh yeah. I mean, the one, yeah, if I just had one more, it'd be Radical Honesty.
Okay,
I
I
have
haven't heard of that one.
I have my Fab Five that I recommend to men specifically, and that's one of them. And yeah, kind of similar to No More Mr. Nice Guy, I'd say that those complement each other really well. But Radical Honesty, it's by Brad Blanton. It's so good on Audible because he narrates it, and he's got this thick Southern accent. He's a psychotherapist, and he gives zero fucks kind of energy, which he fumbles
That's
his
the
words,
best.
goes off, drops f bombs, and it's so refreshing. But the whole idea behind this book is he asserts that modern society is full of a bunch of liars, and like it's one thing to outright lie, but the stronger case that I think he makes, because like cool, most generally good people don't outright lie, or at least all that much. But a lot of people are not being forthright, which is another level of honesty. Is if I'm not sharing what I truly think, feel, believe, and learning the art and skill of doing that effectively, where my intention matches my impact, I think that he just makes a very strong case for why that's so important. And now it's in the name, it is radical. He has a bunch of practices in that book where I'm like, man, that's taking it to the next level that I don't know I would recommend everyone do, but I think there's just
Right.
so much wisdom to glean from it. I mean, he goes as far as to say, when you're with a partner and like a significant other that you're really going all in with, he recommends sooner than later sharing your entire sexual history with each other in the greatest detail that you can recall. And he's like, if that takes hours, so be it. If it takes multiple sessions, and that's just one example of many things. And he has a lot of language hacks on how to be radically honest. And so I think that that's a really great one.
Oh, thank you so much. I love it. And I could feel the energy of that book. It sounds powerful.
Good.
Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And your information, your contact info will be in the description. Thanks again. Any last words?
No, thank you for having me. This is so fun. I don't do this super often, and it just feels good to have like a conversation about my life, what I'm up to. I guess there's a little bit of a narcissist within me that's like likes to hear like, hey, here's who I am. Think I'm cool, like me. I'm still a little kid inside, but all I have to say, I love what I get to do, and I love supporting men. It's so fun. It's so meaningful to me, and so just thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about it a little bit.
Absolutely. It's been an honor. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.